The new studies that we will report in this video are quite sensational. But whether Jesus was 33, 40, or 50 years old when he died matters little to me. As a believer, his actions and words are sources of inspiration for my earthly and spiritual life. However, I understand why many exegetes and scholars try to determine Jesus' exact age. Ultimately, all this focus on certain aspects of his life, his age, his physical appearance, whether he was a man or a god, is just a way to confirm, for those who might still have some doubt, that Jesus really existed. He was also a very important historical figure, among other things. This video will be a bit controversial. Although I am deeply religious, I believe it is right to share the facts that historians and exegetes are working on. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if, in light of new discoveries, it turns out that Jesus was not 33 years old when he died, and that this fact is officially recognized by the Church, which always updates itself slowly. The number 33 has become a symbolic number. 3 is the perfect number of the Trinity. But honestly, I repeat, what does the number matter? What matters to us is what he did, not how old he was. Having said all this, let's report on the new studies, which are quite sensational. Then I leave it to you in the comments to share your thoughts. The birth of Jesus. Considering the conclusions accepted by all biblical scholars, it is essentially said that Jesus was actually born between 7 and 6 BC. This fact is reported, for example, in Cathopedia, the Catholic encyclopedia published online, which states, assuming the validity of these references, most biblical scholars place the birth after the census of 8 BC and before the death of Herod the Great in 4 BC, with a stronger preference for 7 to 6 BC. I know it is a bit strange to say that Christ was born before Christ, but we must take into account the conventionality of the date, which nonetheless has historical elements that cannot be ignored. The period of the baptism. Another important element in the messianic story of Jesus Christ is the period of the baptism, which occurs around 26 AD. Why? Because John speaks of the first Passover after the baptism, and during that first Passover, Jesus famously drives the merchants out of the temple. Now, in the Gospel of John, there is a precise note that says, when Jesus drove the merchants out of the temple, the Jews said that the temple had been under construction for 46 years. Today, recent archaeological studies confirm that the construction of the temple began in 20 BC. This date is also confirmed by the Roman historian Giuseppe Flavio in his writings. So, 20 BC plus 46 years brings us to 2627 AD. These two events are crucial in the Bible, and we will see why later. In the meantime, we can say that John the Baptist was recruiting an army of fighters. Jesus went to be baptized. Baptism was the ritual by which John the Baptist brought people into his group of fighters who aimed to liberate Israel from foreign rule. The second event, Jesus driving the merchants out of the temple, is a controversial episode that many exegetes and historians consider almost a misstep by Jesus. Many argue that Jesus was targeting those in the temple who were money changers, or selling the small animals that people were legally required to sacrifice at the temple, to God, and to the priests. During Passover, all Jews were required to go to the temple in Jerusalem to perform sacrifices. Many came from far away. What did these faithful have to do? If they wanted to fulfill the obligation of sacrifice, for example, by sacrificing an animal, they had to buy it at their point of departure and transport it to Jerusalem, feeding and caring for it during the long journey. To facilitate this process, merchants offered animals directly on site. Since foreign currency was not allowed in the temple, it was necessary to exchange money for temple currency. These merchants were thus an essential link in the system, especially for the weaker members of society, enabling them to perform sacrifices. Thus, the faithful could buy a dove, exchange it for the appropriate money, and fulfill their religious duties. And what does Jesus do? He does not attack those who had established the laws or imposed heavy taxes, nor those who wrote those rules. Instead, he attacks the weakest link in the chain, those who made it possible for the poorest to fulfill their religious duties. This is surprising. And what happens? Jesus, perhaps hoping to draw the people to his side, acts alone. However, the people do not follow him, and the Romans do not pay attention to him, not even stopping him. His action was perhaps so insignificant and ineffective that no one followed him. Faced with this failure, Jesus probably decides to stop his activity. He realizes that something is wrong and withdraws, disappearing for years. He knows that if he had continued, he would have been easily captured and condemned. So, he decides to disappear. Now, a personal note. If this historical reconstruction were true, it does not bother me. In fact, it brings Jesus closer to my human condition. The fact that Jesus, with the weight of the task he had to accomplish, could make mistakes, makes him feel even closer to me. The return of Jesus. So, when does he come back into play? When John the Baptist dies. Now you understand, and it will become clearer as we continue with the story, why the two events are connected. The first act is the famous calling, described, for example, in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 4, where it says,
As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him.
Historians here argue that it is difficult to imagine putting oneself in the shoes of these family men who are in a boat, doing their work on which the lives of their families, wives, and children depend. Suddenly, they see a man they know nothing about who tells them, "I will make you fishers of men." And they immediately abandon everything, their work, their wives, their children, and follow him. It is not realistic. The only rational explanation is that this was the second calling. These men already knew Jesus. When Jesus had interrupted his activity, they had necessarily returned to their trades. After John the Baptist's death, Jesus decides that the time has come to act. John the Baptist and Jesus, both born thanks to an intervention by the angel Gabriel, had a specific mission. When Jesus learns of John the Baptist's death, he says, "Now it's my turn, we can't waste any more time." And he calls his disciples again. At that point, the disciples understand. The time has finally come to fight and establish the kingdom of God. This explains their immediate adherence, which otherwise would seem pure fantasy if attributed solely to an extraordinary charisma of Jesus. Herod kills John the Baptist. Let's continue with the narration. In the Bible, it is said that John the Baptist dies because Salome performs a particularly erotic dance for Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great. Herod Antipas tells her, "Ask for whatever you want," and she requests the head of John the Baptist. In reality, the Roman historian Giuseppe Flavio tells us something much more logical. When others crowded around John the Baptist, because with his sermons they had reached the highest degree, Herod became alarmed. An eloquence that had such great effects on men could lead to some form of sedition, because it seemed that they wanted to be guided by John in whatever they did. Herod therefore decided that it would be much better to strike in advance and get rid of him before his activity led to an uprising, rather than wait for a disruption and find himself in such a difficult situation that he would regret it. Due to Herod's suspicions, John was taken in chains to Massaronte, and there he was put to death. Well, this is important because it allows us to define a historical date. Herod Antipas had married the daughter of Aretas, king of Petra, but at a certain point decided to repudiate her during a trip to Rome. Aretas's daughter learned of this decision by Herod and took refuge with her father. The father, of course, decided to react and effectively declared war on Herod. This resulted in a battle in which Herod was defeated, and this battle took place in 36 AD. This is a verified historical fact, and Herod is defeated. What does Josephus say about this? To some Jews, it seemed that the destruction of Herod's army by Aretas was a divine punishment, and certainly a just punishment for the manner in which he had treated John, surnamed the Baptist. That is, in 36 AD, Herod was harshly defeated by Aretas because shortly before, for political reasons, he had John the Baptist put to death. So, these are dates that have a sort of historical certification. But there is another historical testimony. Herod decided to seek revenge and turned to the Roman Emperor Tiberius. The emperor ordered the preparation of a military campaign against Aretas. We know that military campaigns were prepared in winter to be fought in spring and summer. However, this campaign was interrupted because in 37 AD, Tiberius died, and thus the punitive campaign against Aretas did not take place at that time. Jesus' death. Therefore, Jesus, who returned to activity around this period, about 36 AD, after the death of John the Baptist, was captured and put to death during the first Passover. We are in 36 AD. We have discussed that according to historians, as reported by Cathopedia, Jesus was born between 7 and 6 BC, after the census of 8 BC, and died in 36 AD at the age of approximately 43 years old. This, in all likelihood, is the age at which Jesus Christ died. Yes, I know, you're skeptical. I understand that when you believe in something your whole life, it's difficult to suddenly change your mind, and it's natural to have some resistance. But there's more to it than that. A biblical quote has really struck me. Scholars, to confirm what has been said so far, cite chapter 8 of the Gospel of John. In this part of the Gospel, Jesus is discussing as usual with his fellow Pharisee masters. Discussions, we know, were not new to Jesus, who did not intend to destroy Pharisaism, but actively participated in disputes, as this was the method of study of the Pharisees, based continuously on contradiction. So Jesus behaved exactly like his fellow Pharisees. At one point, he makes such a significant statement that the Pharisees cannot accept, and they respond, "You are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham?" John 8:57, 58.
"You are not yet 50 years old," they said to him, "and you have seen Abraham. Very truly I tell you, Jesus answered, "Before Abraham was born, I am."
You're not yet 50 years old. Now, in your opinion, according to common sense, would someone who is 30 or 31 years old be told you're not yet 50 years old? No, you would say you're not yet 40 years old. You're not yet 50 years old, is said to someone who has already passed their 40s, and all of this is in line with the historical reconstruction presented in this video. There has been a lot of time dedicated to this controversial video. Please consider it and let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you.